Welcome to the untamed heart of the Old West, Deadwood, South Dakota, a town that thrived on chaos, corruption, and calamity. Known for its gold rush glitz and infamous residents like Wild Bill Hickock and Calamity Jane, Deadwood quickly gained a reputation as a lawless haven where fortunes were made and lives were lost just as fast. Beneath the surface of its rough and tumble allure lies a history darker and more shocking than most dare to imagine. Join us as we uncover the most horrible facts about Deadwood, from its brutal murders to its scandalous scandals. If you love exploring the gritty, unvarnished truths of the Old West, make sure to subscribe to our channel because we've got plenty more where this came from. Let's dive in. The settlement should have never existed. Deadwood's rise to notoriety as a mining hub in the 1870s stemmed from its unique position in history and geography. Unlike other gold rush towns, the Black Hills region of South Dakota, where Deadwood sits, had not been significantly impacted by earlier gold-seeking waves. This was primarily because the area was part of Sioux territory, protected under the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie, which prohibited settlement by non-native individuals. For a time, this legal framework shielded the region from the disruptive influx of fortune seekers. However, the situation changed dramatically after General George Armstrong Custer led an expedition through the Black Hills in 1874. The official purpose of this expedition was to explore the area and confirm reports of gold. Custer's findings and subsequent proclamation of abundant gold deposits sparked a fervor that rippled across the country. Despite the legal restrictions, prospectors, often referred to as trespassers by the Sioux, flooded the region in search of wealth, setting the stage for Deadwood's formation. As miners poured into the Black Hills, the settlement that would become Deadwood began to take shape in a piecemeal fashion. Without legal recognition or support from the U.S. government, the town developed in a chaotic and informal manner. The federal government's hands-off approach, driven in part by the settlement's technically illegal existence, allowed Deadwood to evolve without oversight. This lack of governance delayed the establishment of basic infrastructure and the rule of law. The atmosphere portrayed in modern depictions, such as in television dramas, reflects the unique set of circumstances that shaped Deadwood, a settlement born out of defiance and the lure of gold. Its legacy reminds us that its wild reputation was as much about the legal and political vacuum of the time as it was about the ambition of its early residents. Al Swearingen was real. Ian McShane's portrayal of Al Swearingen in Deadwood stands as one of television's most compelling and complex antagonists. His character is ruthless and unyielding, yet flashes of humanity and even moments of tenderness make him unforgettable. Swearingen is the quintessential survivor in a town where survival was far from guaranteed, navigating the chaos of Deadwood with cunning and brutal pragmatism. While the show's version is layered and, at times, oddly empathetic, the real Al Swearingen presents a much starker picture. The historical Swearingen owned the Gem Theater, a saloon that doubled as a brothel. Like the show depicts, he was deeply involved in the business of sex work, and his reputation was built on a relentless drive for power and profit. However, historical accounts suggest that the real Swearingen lacked the complexity McShane's portrayal imbued in the character. Instead, he appears in records as a figure singularly focused on his own interests, showing little regard for the well-being of those around him. The women who worked for Swearingen faced particularly challenging circumstances. Life in the Gem Theater was harsh, marked by limited access to health care, poor living conditions, and the social stigma of their profession. Many of these women suffered from illnesses related to their work or struggled with substance dependencies. Historical evidence also indicates that the pressures and hardships they endured often led to tragic outcomes, with numerous women meeting untimely ends. Unlike his television counterpart, the real Swearingen exhibited few redeeming qualities. The show hints at a sense of fairness or even reluctant kindness in its fictionalized version of him. In contrast, the historical figure remains a stark reminder of the exploitation that often characterized frontier life. Seth Bullock left his family behind. Seth Bullock's arrival in Deadwood, much like depicted in the series, was motivated by business aspirations rather than law enforcement. Initially, Bullock came to the burgeoning town to establish a hardware store with his business partner Saul Starr. However, Deadwood's rapidly growing population and its notoriety for disorder soon created a pressing need for a figure of authority. The turning point came after the death of Wild Bill Hickock, which left the community shaken and in search of stability. Bullock, who had previously served as a county sheriff in Montana, was uniquely qualified to fill this role. With his prior experience and natural leadership, he became the town's first lawman, tasked with restoring order in a settlement that often operated on the edge of chaos. Bullock's efforts to bring structure to Deadwood were not without challenges. One of his notable adversaries was Al Swearingen, the influential and controversial owner of the Gem Theater. While their interactions were frequently marked by tension, both men understood the practical need for cooperation to maintain a semblance of stability in the unruly town. Bullock's commitment to justice and order gradually transformed Deadwood into a place where families, including his own, could envision a future. His wife and daughter eventually joined him, signaling that the town had achieved a measure of safety and civility. Later in life, Bullock diversified his endeavors by building a ranch near Deadwood, further solidifying his ties to the region. His character and leadership caught the attention of Theodore Roosevelt, with whom he developed a close friendship. When Roosevelt became vice president, he appointed Bullock as a U.S. Marshal, a testament to Bullock's integrity and enduring contributions to public service. His legacy in Deadwood is one of resilience and dedication, embodying the transition from frontier lawlessness to a more structured society. Jack McCall really shot Wild Bill Hickock. When Wild Bill Hickock recounted his adventures, his flair for storytelling often blurred the line between truth and fiction. If someone marveled at how he survived a perilous encounter, he would famously quip, "I didn't." This mix of humor and myth-making added to his larger-than-life persona, making it difficult to separate fact from legend. By the time Hickok arrived in Deadwood in 1876, his reputation as a gunslinger and adventurer had already been firmly established. One of the most enduring myths about Hickok was the claim that he had defeated hundreds of men in quick-draw duels. In reality, this figure was highly exaggerated. Hickok's actual gunfighting career was shorter and more nuanced than the tale suggested. His time as a town marshal in Abilene, Kansas, marked the end of his days as a shooter. During a confrontation with a local outlaw, Hickok inadvertently shot and killed his deputy, an event that deeply unsettled him. The incident seemed to weigh heavily on his conscience, leading him to leave behind his lawman's badge and firearms to pursue a quieter life as a gambler. It was during this phase of his life that Hickok crossed paths with Jack McCall in Deadwood. The dynamic between the two men was far from equal. Hickok, focused on his gambling, likely paid little attention to McCall, even after soundly defeating him in a game of cards. McCall, on the other hand, was clearly humiliated by the loss. In an act of uncharacteristic kindness, Hickok reportedly offered McCall money to buy a meal, a gesture that McCall did not take well. The next day, McCall returned to the saloon, seething from the previous encounter. On that fateful day, Hickok broke his own well-known rule of never sitting with his back to the door. With no other seats available, he reluctantly took the one facing away from the entrance. McCall, driven by anger and a sense of humiliation, walked in and ended Hickok's life with a single shot. McCall later claimed his actions were an act of vengeance, alleging that Hickok had killed his brother years earlier in Abilene. However, no records support McCall's story, suggesting it was more likely an excuse for a rash and violent act. Hickok's untimely death solidified his legend, leaving behind a legacy of heroism, myth, and the complexities of frontier life. Calamity Jane, the tragic life of the woman of the West. Born in 1852, Martha Jane Canary became widely known as Calamity Jane, a name that captured both her adventurous spirit and her tumultuous life. Her teenage years remain somewhat enigmatic, though it is believed she may have worked in roles often associated with frontier towns' marginalized economies. Seeking a new path, Jane eventually left that life behind and joined a group of soldiers, traveling westward until she reached Deadwood, South Dakota. In Deadwood, Calamity Jane's reputation began to take shape. She became renowned for her boldness, her kindness to those in need, and her supposed connections to well-known figures of the time. However, much of her story is shrouded in uncertainty, in part because Jane herself contributed to the myths surrounding her life. Her storytelling often blurred the boundaries between fact and fiction, making it challenging for historians to separate the two. Jane even published an autobiography chronicling her adventures and exploits. While this gave her a platform to shape her own legacy, it also became a source of embellishment. She later capitalized on her fame by performing as herself in Wild West shows, adding further layers of legend to her already colorful image. Her tendency to exaggerate details made her a captivating figure, but complicated efforts to uncover the truth of her life. One of her more audacious claims was that she apprehended Jack McCall, the man who killed Wild Bill Hickock. Despite the dramatic nature of this story, no historical evidence supports it. Instead, it appears to be one of many tales that enhanced her mystique. Her legacy endures as a symbol of resilience, daring, and the storytelling spirit of the American West. The settlement's Chinatown was also booming. When many people hear the term Chinatown, they may picture the bustling streets of San Francisco, adorned with red lanterns and teeming with vibrant markets. However, during the 19th century, even the smallest Western settlements often had their own versions of Chinatowns. Distinct districts where Chinese immigrants established communities, operated businesses, and played pivotal roles in local economies. These enclaves emerged during the era of the Gold Rush, reflecting the important contributions of Asian immigrants to the West's development. Chinese immigrants were integral to the transformation of the American frontier, particularly during the Gold Rush and the subsequent expansion westward. Their efforts extended beyond mining as they took on critical roles in constructing the region's railroads, which connected isolated settlements and facilitated commerce. In many Western towns, including Deadwood, Chinese entrepreneurs were often among the first to open shops and supply vital goods, helping to sustain these burgeoning communities during periods of rapid growth. In Deadwood, the Chinatown district expanded alongside the gold boom, becoming a vibrant part of the town's fabric. The Chinese residents worked hard to integrate in the economic and social dynamics of the settlement. Despite facing prejudice and systemic challenges, interactions between Chinese immigrants and other residents were likely more cooperative than adversarial. While racism was an undeniable issue, the historical record suggests that relations in Deadwood were more nuanced than the conflicts sometimes depicted in fictional accounts. For example, the portrayal of Chinatown in popular media, such as television shows, often sensationalizes its role, exaggerating incidents to heighten drama. Claims of gruesome acts, like bodies being fed to pigs, are not supported by historical evidence. However, what is accurate is the acknowledgement of the close ties between the Chinese pioneers and other settlers. Together, they contributed to the growth and sustainability of Deadwood, showcasing how diverse communities could forge shared opportunities in a challenging frontier environment. The legacy of Deadwood's Chinatown serves as a reminder of the significant yet often underappreciated role Chinese immigrants played in shaping the Old West. Jack McCall trial. After the fatal shooting of Wild Bill Hickock, Jack McCall was quickly apprehended by local townspeople and brought to trial. However, contrary to the dramatic depiction in the television episode The Trial of Jack McCall, the proceedings did not occur in Swearingen Saloon. Instead, they were held at McDaniel's Theater, a venue more fitting for such a significant event. During this trial, McCall defended his actions by claiming that Hickok had killed his brother in Kansas. Despite the seriousness of the accusation, the ad hoc jury acquitted him, citing a lack of solid evidence. McCall wasted no time leaving Deadwood after his release, perhaps believing his notoriety would shield him from further scrutiny. Colonel May, rather than the more famous Seth Bullock, pursued McCall after reports surfaced of his reckless boasting about the killing. McCall's habit of bragging about the incident in various towns made him an easy target to track. May eventually located him in Wyoming and alerted the local authorities. McCall was arrested and brought back into custody, facing a much more formal judicial process. During his second trial, McCall's defense crumbled under the weight of his conflicting stories. At one point, he reiterated his claim that Hickok had killed his brother. Later, he suggested he had been paid to carry out the crime, followed by assertions that he had acted while intoxicated and could not recall the event. In a bizarre twist, McCall even claimed he was not Jack McCall at all. These inconsistent statements undermined his credibility and further implicated him in Hickok's death. By March 1877, McCall was sentenced to capital punishment under the authority of the state. His execution marked the conclusion of one of Deadwood's most infamous episodes, highlighting the tenuous nature of justice in frontier towns. Today, the story of Wild Bill Hickock and Jack McCall continues to captivate audiences. Every summer, actors in Deadwood reenact both the shooting of Wild Bill and the subsequent trial of Jack McCall. This tradition, which began in the 1920s, stands as one of the longest-running theatrical productions in American history. It serves as a reminder of how the legends of the Old West live on, blending history with performance to keep these dramatic tales alive. Al Swearengen's Gem Theater burned down 3 times. The Gem Theater was not just a business for Al Swearengen, it was his pride and his primary source of income. Opening the saloon in 1876, Swearengen cleverly used it to entice vulnerable working-class women into a life of sex work, trapping them in a cycle of debt. While this approach may have been profitable for him, it was a grim chapter for many of the women involved. Despite its success in this regard, the building itself seemed cursed. The Gem's first major disaster occurred in 1879 when a fire ravaged much of Deadwood, including Swearengen's prized establishment. Undeterred, he rebuilt the saloon, reopening it in the same location and continuing his business. But the Gem's fate would not be kind. In 1894, another devastating fire struck the town, again destroying the Gem along with many buildings on the main street. Swearengen, persistent as ever, rebuilt the saloon once more, determined to maintain his hold over Deadwood's underworld. However, the third time was the charm, in a disastrous sense. In 1899, a third fire engulfed the Gem Theater. The firefighters who arrived to battle the flames found themselves thwarted. Their equipment had been deliberately sabotaged, leaving them powerless to save the building. Once again, the Gem was reduced to ashes, and Swearengen's attempts to resurrect his iconic business were thwarted. George Hearst went on to a future. In politics, the arrival of so many notable figures in Deadwood during the same period almost seems too remarkable to be true when viewed from a modern perspective. While there are some minor discrepancies and ongoing debates about the historical accuracy of various details depicted in shows about Deadwood, the broad strokes of the story are largely rooted in reality. One of the most significant real-life figures to enter Deadwood during the late 1870s was George Hearst, the father of the famous newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst. In 1877, Hearst arrived in the settlement and quickly began acquiring mining claims, notably purchasing the Homestake Mine. This mine would go on to become one of the richest gold deposits in American history, greatly enriching Hearst and solidifying his place in the annals of the Old West's economic history. George Hearst's ambitions extended far beyond mining, however. With a keen interest in politics, he eventually achieved his goal of becoming a United States Senator in the latter part of his life. His political career, although impactful, was perhaps overshadowed by the influence he would later wield in the world of media. In 1880, Hearst purchased the San Francisco Examiner, marking the beginning of a new phase in his life. He brought his son, William Randolph Hearst, into the family business, allowing the younger Hearst to take control of the newspaper. Under his leadership, the Examiner rapidly grew in influence and circulation, setting the stage for William Randolph Hearst to build a vast media empire. The Hearst family's legacy in media would come to define much of the 20th century. William Randolph Hearst's innovative approach to journalism, particularly his use of sensationalist stories to attract readers, became a hallmark of his empire. This success was built upon the foundation laid by his father, George Hearst, whose investments in the mines and media industry helped shape the course of American history. The Black Hills Gold Rush attracted thousands of miners. When the miners arrived in Deadwood, they came in large numbers, dramatically transforming the landscape of the town. At its peak, Deadwood was much larger and more developed than the television portrayal suggests. In 1876, the population of the settlement stood at around 3,000 residents, with nearly 200 businesses operating within the town's limits. In addition to the permanent residents, the town was flooded by a constant influx of transient miners who came to strike it rich and stayed for short periods, further swelling the town's population. This influx of people spurred the rapid construction of more substantial buildings, including the first brick-and-mortar structures, which signaled a shift toward a more settled community. As Deadwood grew, so did the need for order and stability. This need was addressed in part by the arrival of Seth Bullock, a seasoned lawman who would go on to serve as the town's sheriff. Bullock's presence helped usher in a period of increased law enforcement and a stronger sense of organization, which was essential in taming the wild frontier. However, it wasn't until a catastrophic fire in 1879 that the town's transition to a more permanent, structured community truly accelerated. The fire, which started in a bakery on Sherman Street, quickly spread and destroyed much of Deadwood's business district, leaving the town vulnerable to further devastation. In the aftermath of the fire, residents of Deadwood were determined to rebuild, but they took steps to ensure that such a disaster wouldn't strike again. One of the most significant changes was the decision to rebuild homes and businesses using brick rather than the wooden structures that had fueled the fire's spread. To enforce this new approach to construction, the local government passed laws mandating that building materials be fire-resistant, effectively banning the use of lumber in the construction of new buildings. This shift not only helped protect the town from future fires, but also marked the beginning of a more permanent and resilient settlement, one that was slowly evolving from a chaotic mining camp into a more organized, law-abiding community. There's debate over how much people cursed in the Wild West. One of the defining features of Deadwood is the frequent use of profanity that flows freely from its characters, especially Al Swearingen, who often delivers long, foul-mouthed tirades. This leads to the question, did the pioneers of the Old West truly speak in such a crude and colorful manner? The answer isn't entirely clear, but it is likely more nuanced. Linguistic experts have raised some doubts, noting that many of the specific insults used in the show were not in common use during the 1870s and 1880s, the time period in which Deadwood is set. Jesse Scheidlower, the American editor for the Oxford English Dictionary, suggests that the type of profanity we hear in the show was not prevalent at the time. However, David Milch, the creator of Deadwood, offers a different perspective. Milch argues that sources like the Oxford English Dictionary might not be reliable in capturing the linguistic realities of the time. He suggests that these dictionaries would not have recognized many of the profanities that were in common use during the 19th century, long after the words had gained widespread popularity. In defending the language used in the show, Milch emphasizes that while historians and linguists might question the specifics, they cannot always account for the lived experiences of those who were part of the frontier life. As he puts it, I'm not publishing a dictionary. This debate highlights the challenges of accurately depicting historical speech. While we may never know exactly how rough and tumble pioneers expressed themselves, it's clear that the show's use of language was meant to capture the raw, gritty nature of life in Deadwood, a place where social norms were often pushed to the limit. As we've seen, Deadwood was a town that thrived on chaos, lawlessness, and danger. Its history is riddled with corruption, violence, and the dark realities of frontier life that often get glossed over in the midst of the Old West. But behind the infamous stories and larger-than-life characters, the legacy of this town remains a reminder of the harsh, unforgiving nature of the Wild West. If you found these facts about Deadwood intriguing, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more deep dives into the dark and fascinating history of the American Old West. You won't want to miss the next chapter in this incredible story.